I never expected that one phone call from my mother would shatter everything I thought I knew about family. When she invited me to what she called a special family celebration for their 25th wedding anniversary, something in her voice felt different. Maybe it was hope that made me ignore the warning signs. As someone who was adopted, I had always felt like I was walking on thin ice with my family constantly trying to prove I belonged. But this invitation felt like an olive branch after months of tension. Before I dive into the story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you have not already. Trust me, you will want to hear how this family dinner changed everything. Now let me tell you what happened when I walked through that door. Let me paint you a picture of my life before that devastating evening. I am Evelyn, 28 years old, and I was adopted when I was just 6 months old. My family consists of my father, James, my mother, Patricia, and my older sister, Madison, who is 30, and their biological daughter. Growing up, I always sensed something different in how Madison treated me, but I convinced myself it was just typical sibling rivalry. The cracks in our family foundation became impossible to ignore last year, during my father's birthday celebration. Madison had too much wine and made a comment that cut deep. She looked directly at me and said, "You know, adopted kids never really belong the same way. It is just different." The room went silent, and while my parents awkwardly changed the subject, the damage was done. That comment haunted me for weeks. After that incident, I made the difficult decision to move out and live independently. I reduced contact with my family, speaking to them maybe once every few weeks. The distance helped me heal, but it also created this constant ache in my chest. I missed the good times we'd shared, the family traditions, the feeling of belonging somewhere. So when my mother, Patricia, called me 3 weeks ago, her voice carried an unusual tone. She was almost pleading as she said, "Evelyn, honey, we are having a really special family celebration. This is so important to us, and we really want you there." She emphasized the word family in a way that made my heart flutter with hope. Maybe this was their way of extending an olive branch, of acknowledging that I truly was part of this family. Despite my reservations, I decided to attend. I wanted to believe that we could repair our fractured relationships. I spent hours shopping for the perfect gift, eventually settling on an expensive crystal vase that cost me nearly $300. I picked out my nicest dress, a navy blue one that my mother had once complimented. I even got my hair done professionally, because I wanted to show them that I had grown into a successful, confident woman. The day before the celebration, I noticed Madison had posted something on social media about a family dinner. She had tagged several relatives, but I was not included in the post. A small voice in my head whispered that this was strange, but I pushed the feeling aside. Maybe she just forgot to tag me, or maybe it was a surprise element of the celebration. As I drove to my childhood home that Saturday evening, my stomach was doing flips. I turned into the familiar driveway, noting that there were many more cars parked there than I had expected. Through the large windows, I could see the warm glow of lights and hear the distant sound of laughter and conversation. The house looked festive and welcoming, exactly like the family gatherings I remembered from my younger years. I knocked on the front door, holding the carefully wrapped crystal vase in my hands. When my mother, Patricia, opened the door, her expression was not what I expected. Instead of the warm welcome I'd hoped for, she looked genuinely uncomfortable, almost guilty. Her smile seemed forced as she said, "Oh, honey, I'm so glad you came, but..." That "but" hung in the air like a sword about to fall. I stepped inside and immediately understood why her greeting felt so awkward. The house was beautifully decorated with flowers and elegant place settings. A long dining table dominated the living room, set for what looked like 15 to 20 people. I could see extended family members mingling, aunts and uncles and cousins that I rarely saw except for major holidays. As I scanned the room, counting the chairs around the table, a cold realization began to creep over me. There were exactly enough seats for the people present, but there was no place set for me. No empty chair, no extra plate, nothing that suggested I was expected to join this intimate family gathering. The moment of truth came when Madison appeared from the kitchen wearing a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, you actually came," she said, her tone dripping with false surprise. It was clear that my arrival was not the pleasant surprise I'd hoped it would be. I tried to make sense of the situation, offering to help set up an additional chair. "I can grab a chair from the kitchen if you need me to," I said, still clinging to the hope that this was just a simple oversight. But the uncomfortable silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Some of my relatives avoided making eye contact with me, while others seemed genuinely confused about what was happening. I could hear my aunt whispering to my uncle, "Where is Evelyn going to sit?" The question hung in the air, unanswered and increasingly awkward. Then Madison decided to end the charade. She stood up straighter, that cruel smile widening as she delivered the blow that would change everything between us forever. "Sorry, Evelyn, but this dinner is for immediate family only." Her words were delivered with such casual cruelty that for a moment I thought I had misheard her. She continued, clearly enjoying the power she held in that moment. "Grandma and Grandpa specifically requested this. They want to keep tonight intimate, you know. Traditional family values and all that." She gestured toward our elderly grandparents who were sitting quietly at the far end of the table, looking confused by the sudden attention. "Only blood relatives get a spot at the table tonight," Madison added, her voice carrying a finality that made my stomach drop. The phrase blood relatives hit me like a physical blow. After 27 years of calling these people family, after growing up in this house, after believing that love was stronger than biology, I was being told that none of it mattered. I looked around the room again, this time with new eyes. I saw cousins who were sitting comfortably at the table, people who visited maybe twice a year, but were considered more family than I was. I saw aunts and uncles who barely knew my middle name, but whose blood connection granted them a seat that was denied to me. My father, James, stood in the corner of the room, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets. When our eyes met, he immediately looked away. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had walked me to school on my first day, who had called me his daughter for almost 3 decades, could not even look at me as I was being humiliated and excluded. My mother, Patricia, offered a weak, pathetic apology that made everything worse. "Maybe next time, sweetheart," she said, as if this was some kind of scheduling conflict rather than a deliberate act of exclusion. Her words felt like another slap in the face. In that moment, 27 years of memories came flooding back. Every time Madison had corrected someone who called us both the daughters, insisting on the daughter and the adopted daughter. Every family photo where I was positioned slightly apart from the core family group. Every conversation where my opinions were dismissed with, "Well, you would not understand, it is a family thing." I realized that this was not a spontaneous decision or a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate message carefully orchestrated to remind me of my place in their hierarchy. The phone call, the invitation, the build-up, it was all designed to make this moment of exclusion as painful as possible. They wanted me to show up so they could turn me away, so they could make their point crystal clear. My hands started shaking as I held the expensive gift I'd brought. My throat felt tight, and I could feel tears threatening to spill over. But I refused to give Madison the satisfaction of seeing me break down in front of everyone. I refused to become the dramatic scene that would give them something to talk about for years to come. Instead of exploding or arguing or begging for inclusion, I made a choice that surprised everyone in that room, including myself. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and simply nodded. "I understand," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I hope you all have a wonderful evening." The simplicity of my response clearly caught Madison off guard. She had been expecting tears, anger, a dramatic scene that would justify their treatment of me. Instead, she got dignity and grace, which somehow made her look smaller and more petty by comparison. I gently set the crystal vase down on the entry table where gifts were being collected. I did not throw it or slam it down in anger. I simply placed it there like the peace offering it had been intended to be, knowing it would likely be the last gift I ever gave to this family. Madison's smirk was widening as I walked toward the door. She thought she had won, thought she had finally succeeded in putting me in my place. But as I walked past her with my head held high, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Maybe it was the realization that this victory felt emptier than she had expected. I did not slam the door behind me. I did not shout angry words as I left. I simply walked out of the house where I'd grown up, got into my car, and drove home in complete silence. The 20-minute drive felt like hours as I processed what had just happened and what it meant for my future. When I finally reached my apartment, I allowed myself to fall apart. I cried for the family I thought I had, for the belonging I had desperately wanted to believe in, and for the little girl inside me who had never stopped hoping that someday she would be truly accepted. I called my best friend Sarah, who listened as I recounted the entire humiliating experience. "They did not just exclude you," she said, her voice shaking with anger on my behalf. "They invited you specifically so they could exclude you. That is psychological warfare, Evelyn." Her words helped me understand what I had instinctively felt. This was not about seating arrangements or family traditions. This was about power and control and making sure I knew exactly where I stood in their hierarchy. That night, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my life. I decided to cut contact with my family entirely. I blocked their phone numbers, unfollowed them on social media, and changed all my emergency contacts at work and with my doctors. I was done being the family scapegoat, done accepting crumbs of affection, done pretending that biology was not everything to them when it clearly was. The next morning, I started looking for a therapist who specialized in adoption trauma and family dysfunction. I realized that I had been carrying wounds from childhood that I had never properly addressed. The constant feeling of being on the outside, the need to constantly prove my worth, the way I had normalized treatment that no one should have to accept. But while I was beginning my journey toward healing, chaos was erupting in the family I'd left behind. By Sunday morning, my relatives were calling my mother, Patricia, asking questions about my absence from the dinner. Several of them had expected me to be there and were confused about why I had not joined the celebration. When my cousin posted a family photo on social media, people immediately started commenting, asking, "Where is Evelyn?" It became clear that most of the extended family had not been part of Madison's exclusion plan. In fact, many of them were upset when they learned what had happened. The most shocking revelation came when my grandmother called my mother directly. She was confused and hurt to learn that her name had been used to justify my exclusion. "I never said anything about blood relatives, only," she told my mother. "Why would you tell Evelyn that I did not want her there? That child has been part of this family since she was a baby." Madison's lie was completely exposed, and suddenly my parents were faced with the reality of what they had allowed to happen. They had let their biological daughter manipulate them into betraying their adopted daughter, and now the extended family was asking uncomfortable questions about their choices. My father, James, who had remained silent during my humiliation, finally found his voice. But it was too late. He called my blocked number repeatedly, leaving voicemails where he admitted that he had been a coward, that he should have stood up for me, that he was ashamed of his silence. The panic in their voices grew stronger each day as they realized that they might have pushed me away permanently. They had expected me to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness and acceptance, like I had done countless times before. But this time was different. By Monday evening, they showed up at my apartment building, all three of them together. I watched from my window as they knocked on my door, calling my name and pleading for me to let them in. My father's voice was hoarse as he shouted apologies through the door. "Evelyn, please, we made a terrible mistake. Please, just talk to us." My mother, Patricia, was crying something I had rarely seen in my entire life. She kept saying, "I am sorry, baby, I am so sorry," over and over again. Even Madison was there, though her apologies sounded forced and scripted. For 45 minutes, they stood outside my door. Madison finally admitted that she had lied about our grandparents making the blood relatives only request. She claimed it was because of protective instincts, and that she thought she was looking out for the family's best interests. Her explanation was weak and unconvincing, but at least it was an admission of guilt. I refused to open the door. I had learned in therapy that I did not owe forgiveness to people who had hurt me, especially when that forgiveness had been weaponized against me in the past. They had taught me that my pain was less important than their comfort, and I was finally ready to stop accepting that lesson. For the next several weeks, they tried everything they could think of to reach me. They left flowers outside my door, sent cards to my workplace, and even contacted my old high school teachers to ask them to intervene on their behalf. The desperation in their efforts was almost pathetic, but it also revealed how little they understood about the depth of the damage they had caused. Meanwhile, I was thriving in ways I had never expected. Therapy was helping me understand patterns that had shaped my entire life. I realized that I had been living as a perpetual people pleaser, constantly trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I started building stronger relationships with my chosen family, people who valued me for who I was, rather than tolerating me, despite what I was not. I got a promotion at work partly because I was no longer constantly distracted by family drama and the emotional exhaustion that came with it. I started painting something I'd given up in college because Madison had mocked my artistic attempts. I even began dating Marcus, a kind man who was baffled when I explained that some families treat adoption as a secondary form of belonging. 6 months after that devastating dinner, I ran into my mother, Patricia, at the grocery store. She had aged significantly, with new lines around her eyes and gray roots showing in her usually perfectly maintained hair. She looked smaller, somehow diminished by the weight of her choices. "Evelyn," she said, her voice breaking, "please, can we just talk for a few minutes?" I agreed to listen, though I made no promises about forgiveness or reconciliation. She told me that the family was falling apart without me. Madison's marriage was struggling because her husband was disgusted by what she had done. My father's health was declining, and his doctor said stress was making his blood pressure dangerously high. "We thought you would come back," she admitted. "You always came back before, no matter how badly we treated you." We took that for granted, and we were wrong. I listened to everything she had to say, and I felt something I had never expected to feel: pity. Not the desperate, crushing sadness I'd carried for months, but a detached kind of pity for people who had destroyed something precious through their own cruelty and ignorance. I told her that I would be willing to maintain very limited contact. Holiday cards perhaps, but no family gatherings, no intimate dinners, no pretending that we were something we had never truly been. Any future relationship would have to include genuine respect, true equality, and a full acknowledgement of the harm they had caused. "I do not need you to understand why what you did was wrong," I told her. "I just need you to accept that it was wrong and that there are consequences for treating people badly, even when those people are family." Looking back on that terrible evening and everything that followed, I learned something that has transformed my entire life. Sometimes walking away is not giving up. Sometimes it is the strongest, most loving thing you can do for yourself. I learned that family is not just about shared blood or legal documents. It is about who shows up for you consistently, who celebrates your successes without jealousy, and who treats your pain as if it matters. You teach people how to treat you by what you are willing to accept. For too many years, I had accepted scraps of affection and called it love. I had tolerated exclusion and called it family tradition. I had normalized cruelty and called it sibling rivalry. But healing required me to stop accepting those things, even when the cost was losing the only family I had ever known. The family I have built for myself now is small but mighty. Sarah, who listened to me cry and never once suggested I should just forgive and forget. Marcus, who cannot understand why anyone would question my belonging anywhere. My mentor at work, who has become like an older sister to me. The other members of my adoption support group, who understand the unique pain of loving people who see your love as conditional. These people celebrate my existence rather than questioning my belonging. They do not see my adoption as something that makes me less than or different from. They see it as simply one part of my story, no more or less significant than any other chapter. I still exchange Christmas cards with my parents, and occasionally my mother sends me updates about family news. Madison and I have no contact, and I'm perfectly at peace with that choice. My father has reached out a few times, asking if we could have coffee, but I am not ready for that level of interaction. Maybe someday, but not today. What I want everyone who hears this story to understand is that you have the right to walk away from people who consistently hurt you, even if they are family. You have the right to demand better treatment, and you have the right to remove yourself from situations that damage your mental health and self-worth. Forgiveness is not something you owe to people who have hurt you. It is something you can choose to give if and when it serves your own healing, but it should never be demanded or expected. And forgiveness does not mean you have to restore relationships that were toxic or harmful. I want to ask all of you watching this, have you ever had to make the difficult choice to distance yourself from family members who consistently hurt you? How did you find the strength to put your own well-being first? Please share your experiences in the comments below, because your story might help someone else who is struggling with similar decisions. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more real-life experiences and discussions about family dynamics. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they are not alone in dealing with difficult family relationships. Thank you for listening to my story with such openness and compassion. I hope that wherever you are in your own journey with family relationships, you remember that you deserve to be loved fully and unconditionally. You deserve to belong without having to earn it, and you deserve to be celebrated rather than tolerated. I learned that sometimes the family that raised you is not the family that deserves you, and that is okay. Because the family you choose, the one that celebrates your existence rather than questions your belonging, that is where real love lives.